Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to get into something called Panarchy.
Yeah?
It's all about how systems, work and how tiny changes can, snowball into huge effects.
Yeah.
And I think everyone listening has felt stuck at some point, on a project or at their job or even in, a certain way of thinking.
Right.
So today we are hoping Panarchy will give us some new ways of thinking about all that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Okay, cool.
It's all about seeing the connections between things that you wouldn't normally think are connected.
Okay, I like that.
So we're going to be using this website called Liberating Structures as our source.
Okay.
And they have this whole method called, Panarchy.
So we're not getting bogged down in the tiny details today. We're taking the big picture view.
Exactly.
Love that. And the idea that even small actions can have these huge ripple effects is really cool, too. It makes you feel like you can actually make a difference.
Absolutely.
Like you have agency.
And that's really the key, right? This idea that we're all part of these systems, and even our smallest actions can have a big impact.
I like that.
On the system as a whole.
Yeah, and that's something that the source really stresses. There's this quote from Francisco Varela. If a living system is suffering from ill health, the remedy is to connect it with more of itself.
Yeah, I love that quote.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think, so often we try to solve problems in isolation.
Yeah.
When really the solution is to strengthen the connections within the system itself. It's like, think of a garden.
Okay.
If one plant isn't doing well, you wouldn't just focus on that one plant, right? You'd look at the soil, the sunlight, the other plants around it.
You'd look at the whole ecosystem.
The whole ecosystem, yeah.
So we need to become like gardeners of systems.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's a beautiful analogy.
Thanks.
But how does that translate into an actual method?
Right.
Like, how can we actually use Panarchy to change these systems?
Well, so the core of the Panarchy method is to kind of map out the different levels of a system.
Okay.
And then see where the obstacles are, but also the opportunities for spreading ideas and innovations.
I see.
Across those levels.
Okay, so let's say, let's say we were trying to improve educational outcomes for a certain group of students.
Okay, yeah.
How would we map that out using Panarchy?
Okay, so you'd get a room full of people who have different perspectives.
Right, so teachers, administrators.
Yeah, teachers, administrators, parents, even the students themselves.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then using the Panarchy framework, you map out all the levels of the system.
Okay.
So you start with what's called the micro level.
Got it. So that's like the ground level.
Yeah. So that would be the individual students, their families, their classrooms.
Okay.
Then you zoom out to what's called the meso level.
So we're getting bigger now.
Yeah. So that's the school itself, the district, funding sources,
for sure,
the policies that govern education.
So now you're starting to see those big forces. Exactly.
But it gets even bigger, right?
It does. Then you go all the way out to the macro level.
Okay.
Which is like the cultural attitudes toward education.
Right.
Economic factors that impact families.
Oh, wow.
And even the political landscape around education.
So this is a pretty comprehensive view of
right.
The entire educational ecosystem.
It is.
Wow. But how do you even separate those levels?
That's a great question.
Yeah, where do you draw the line?
That's where a good facilitator comes in. Because those boundaries can be fuzzy.
Yeah.
And it often depends on your perspective.
But
the key is to just identify the key influences at each level.
Okay.
And see how they interact.
So it's not about drawing neat little boxes.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the relationships between those boxes.
Exactly. And once you have this visual representation of the system, then you can analyze what's happening.
At each level.
At each level, yeah.
Okay.
Is it in a phase of growth? Stability?
Creative destruction or renewal.
Okay, so this is where that eco-cycle thing comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Can you just remind me how that works?
Yeah, so imagine a project you're working on and it just feels stuck.
Okay, like it's going nowhere.
Yeah, and you're just feeling frustrated, maybe even hopeless.
Like I've been there many times.
That feeling of stagnation, of things just falling apart.
Yeah.
That's actually a specific phase in the eco-cycle called creative destruction.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So by understanding where each level of the system is on this eco-cycle, you can kind of nudge it in the right direction.
Okay, so the eco-cycle gives you a framework for understanding the natural cycle of growth and maturity, decline.
And renewal that systems go through.
Okay.
And by recognizing where each level is in that cycle, you can start to anticipate challenges and also identify opportunities
I like that.
to develop strategies.
So I think I'm starting to see how the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
You've got the Panarchy to map it all out,
Uh-huh.
and then the ecocycle to look at each part.
Yeah.
But what's next? How do we go from analysis to action?
Right. So that's where it gets really exciting.
Okay.
Once you understand the system in all its levels,
Yeah.
then you can start to brainstorm
Oh.
obstacles and opportunities for change.
At each level.
At each level, yeah.
But the key here is to look for those connections between the levels, right? So it's like we're playing strategic dominoes.
I love that.
You're trying to find which domino to push over to set off the biggest chain reaction.
That's a great analogy.
And the source had a great example about this with the Native American school administrators, right?
Yes, exactly.
What were some of the challenges they were facing?
So they were dealing with, high dropout rates, low test scores.
It's pretty serious, yeah.
Yeah, and a lack of culturally relevant curriculum.
Right. So like systemic problems.
Very systemic.
How did they use Panarchy to tackle all that?
Well, they realized they couldn't just focus on changing what was happening in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
They had to address the whole system.
Okay, but how?
So they used Panarchy.
Okay.
They brought together a really diverse group of stakeholders.
Okay.
Teachers, administrators, parents, community leaders, even the students.
Wow.
To create this Panarchy chart of the entire educational ecosystem.
That must have been really powerful.
Wow.
To just like see it all laid out.
Yeah.
So they could identify those leverage points, right?
Exactly. And they realized they needed to address challenges at multiple levels.
Like what?
From individual student advising all the way up to tackling societal myths about Native American education.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what were some of those myths?
Well, there were a lot of deeply ingrained biases
Uh-huh.
and stereotypes they had to challenge.
Like what?
Like, there was this prevailing belief that Native American students weren't interested in higher education
Oh, wow.
or that they weren't capable of succeeding academically.
So they were fighting against this whole system of beliefs.
They were.
That was holding their students back.
Mm.
So how did they approach that?
Well, they started by raising awareness,
Okay.
both within the school community and the broader society.
Okay.
They organized workshops, gave presentations, worked with the media.
So it was a multi-pronged approach.
It was.
They weren't just trying to change minds within the schools. They were looking at the big picture.
They were tackling the cultural context.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
It shows how Panarchy can address really complex social issues.
It does.
But I'm also thinking about how it can be applied to, like, everyday challenges.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about it. It's versatility. You can use it to understand and influence systems of all sizes.
So it's not just for social activists or policymakers.
Not all.
It's something we can all use
Absolutely.
to navigate our lives. And actually, the source also mentions an example about an artist who used Panarchy to understand the potential impact of her work.
I love that example.
Yeah, tell me more about her.
So she's a painter, and her work explores themes of identity, belonging, and our connection to nature.
Okay, so how did she use Panarchy?
So she started by mapping out the different levels that her art interacts with.
Okay.
So the micro level was her personal creative process. Then the meso level was the art world itself.
Okay.
And then the macro level was society as a whole.
So she's thinking about how her art, like, ripples outward
Exactly.
and influences all these levels.
Yeah, and by using the Panarchy framework, she identified these leverage points.
Like what?
Well, for example, she realized that by collaborating with other artists
Okay.
and community organizations,
Yeah.
she could amplify her message and reach a wider audience.
So she's using Panarchy to, like, strategize
Yeah,
about how to make the most impact with your art.
exactly. And it's not just about her own success. It's about using her art for social good.
I love that. So Panarchy can empower individuals to make a difference.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a good place to, like, wrap up this first part of our deep dive, but hopefully we've given everyone a taste of Panarchy and this really powerful framework. And we've just scratched the surface here.
We have.
But I think, it's sparked some curiosity.
Yeah.
In me, at least.
And me too.
And hopefully in our listeners about this really fascinating framework for understanding systems.
It's pretty amazing.
So join us for the next part of our deep dive, where we're going to look at even more ways that Panarchy is being used out there in the real world.
I'm excited.
Me too.
Okay, see you there.
Bye. Okay, so welcome back to our Panarchy deep dive.
Yeah.
For anyone just joining us, we're talking about how systems work and how even tiny changes can create big effects. But I want to moves beyond just the theory now.
Okay.
Let's see how Panarchy actually works, in the real world.
Yeah.
You mentioned some examples earlier, like from the source material, about hospital safety and disaster preparedness.
Right, right. Those are great examples of how Panarchy can be used for really specific problems.
Yeah, give me an example. How would that work?
Okay, so imagine like a group of people who are really concerned about hospital safety,
Okay.
and they're trying to reduce hospital-acquired infections.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big issue.
Huge issue.
And it probably involves a lot of different levels of the healthcare system.
It does. So using Panarchy, they would start by, mapping out the system,
Okay.
like we talked about.
Okay, so from the little things to the big things.
Right, so starting with a micro level, like individual patients, nurses, doctors, the actual procedures.
Got it.
Then they zoom out to the meso level, so that would be the hospital's policies, the layout of the hospital, communication between staff. And then finally, they'd consider the macro level, which is like government regulations, funding models, even societal attitudes towards healthcare.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, hand washing
No, it's way bigger than that.
or sterilizing equipment.
It's about the whole context.
Yeah, that web of things that contribute to these infections.
Exactly. And once they have that map, then they can start looking for those leverage points.
Those places where even a tiny change can make a big difference.
Yes.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, so maybe they realize that there's a communication breakdown between the nurses and doctors during shift changes.
Okay.
And maybe because of that, some crucial information about a patient's infection risk isn't being shared properly.
Oh, so a small communication problem can lead to a huge problem
Exactly.
down the line.
Right.
Okay.
And maybe just by fixing that communication issue, like having a standardized handoff procedure, they could prevent a ton of infections.
Wow. So it's like finding those like little details that actually have a huge impact.
It is. It is.
That's amazing.
And it's not just about finding the problems. It's also about designing solutions that actually work within the system.
Right. Because you don't want to just disrupt everything.
No, you want to work with what you have.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, remember how we talked about how the source material really emphasizes using Panarchy to spread good ideas?
Yeah, like those innovations.
Right, innovations.
Okay.
So, for example, maybe these hospital safety people find out about a really effective hand-washing protocol
Okay.
that another hospital's using,
Yeah.
and it's like drastically reduced their infection rates.
So they found a solution, but now they need to implement it in their hospital.
Right, but they can't just copy and paste
Okay, why not?
because every hospital is different,
Yeah.
What works in one place might not work in another.
Because of different staffing levels, different resources.
Different resources, different cultures even.
Yeah, okay. So they need to adapt it.
Right, and that's where the creativity comes in.
So Panarchy is not just about following a formula. It's about being creative and adaptable.
Exactly.
So it sounds like this is a really collaborative process.
Very collaborative
You've got people from all different parts of the system coming
Yeah.
together
with all their different perspectives.
and finding solutions that work for everybody.
Yeah, and that's one of the most powerful things about Panarchy.
Okay, and you also mentioned an example about disaster preparedness.
Right.
And how foundations are using Panarchy for that.
Yeah, so imagine like a bunch of different organizations that are all working on disaster preparedness in a place that's prone to, let's say, earthquakes.
Okay, like California.
Yeah, California is a good example.
So you've got people working on search and rescue, medical aid, infrastructure.
Yeah, all these different pieces.
All those different pieces.
Yeah, and they might be working in silos.
Not really talking to each other.
Right, not really coordinating.
Okay, so how does Panarchy help?
So they can use Panarchy to map out that whole disaster response system.
Okay.
Identify the key players, the resources, the potential bottlenecks.
Right, so everyone can see where they fit in.
Exactly, and then they can start coordinating their activities.
Sharing resources.
Sharing resources,
Coming up with a plan.
developing those strategies for a more effective response.
So it's like moving from working separately to working together.
Yeah, it's about creating synergy.
I like that.
And it can also help them to anticipate challenges.
Like what?
Maybe they realize that there's going to be a communication breakdown
Uh-huh.
between the first responders and the hospitals.
Yeah, if the cell towers are down or something.
Exactly, so they can start developing contingency plans.
So they're not just responding to the disaster.
Right.
They're thinking ahead.
They're trying to prevent problems.
I like that, being proactive.
Yeah, it's a key part of systems thinking.
It's not just about fixing things that are broken.
Right.
It's about designing things
Building in that resilience
to be more resilient.
from the start.
Okay, so we've talked about healthcare, We've talked about disaster preparedness. What other areas is Panarchy being used in?
Well, the source also mentions this really interesting case study
Yeah.
about a company called Artistream
Okay.
that's using AI to create music.
Oh, wow. AI making music.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But what does Panarchy have to do with that?
So they were facing a lot of challenges,
Yeah, the music industry is tough
really
to
tough.
break into.
Yeah, so they needed to figure out how to position their product, reach their target audience,
Yeah.
and navigate all the legal and ethical complexities of AI music.
Okay, that sounds way more complicated than the hospital example.
It is in a different way.
But the same principles of Panarchy apply.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how did they do it?
So they mapped out the system, starting with their own company.
The micro level.
Yeah, then the music industry itself,
Meso.
and then society's attitudes towards AI and creativity.
It's macro.
Macro, exactly.
So mapping it all out, seeing the connections.
Yeah, and once they did that, they realized they needed to build relationships with key players in the music industry.
Like who?
Like established artists, producers, record labels.
Okay, so they're not trying to disrupt the system.
No, they're trying to work within it.
They're collaborating.
Yeah, and they were using Panarchy to guide their whole communication strategy,
I see.
making sure their message made sense to all these different people.
Okay, so it's like using Panarchy to speak the right language
Exactly.
to each level of the system.
Yes.
It's really amazing how this one framework can be applied to so many different things.
It is.
From improving healthcare to making music with AI.
It's all about systems thinking
Seeing those connections.
and finding those leverage points.
Where we can actually make a difference.
Exactly. And it's not just about solving problems.
It's about making things better.
It's about creating systems that are more equitable and sustainable,
Yeah, I like that.
more resilient.
So, listener, I think the takeaway here is that Panarchy can help you see the bigger picture,
It can.
no matter what you're working on, whether it's a personal project or a huge social issue.
Absolutely.
And in our next part, we're going to bring it all home.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about what Panarchy means for you, the listener, and how you can use these ideas to make a difference in your own life.
I'm excited for that one.
Me too. Okay, so we're back. And we've been on this deep dive into Panarchy.
Yeah.
This awesome way of understanding systems,
Uh-huh.
and how these little actions can have these big ripple effects.
It's pretty amazing.
We've talked about how it's used in healthcare, in disaster preparedness, even in like AI music. But now I want to bring it home to like our everyday lives.
Okay.
What does all this systems thinking actually mean for, the person listening right now? And actually, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about this project I'm working on that just feels so stuck,
Oh, yeah.
like totally stuck in that creative destruction phase of the eco-cycle.
Ah, I see.
It's that feeling of being stuck,
Yeah, and that often means we're too focused on just one level of the system.
It's like trying to untangle a knot, but you're only looking at one strand.
Yeah. You can't see the whole thing.
Right. So Panarchy helps us to zoom out and see that bigger picture.
Okay.
So what's the context of your project? What are the different levels at play?
Okay, so it's this community initiative, right?
Wow.
We're trying to improve access to fresh food
Uh-huh.
in neighborhoods that don't have a lot of grocery stores,
Yeah, right.
But we're having trouble getting local businesses to like partner with us.
I see.
And it's just been like this huge roadblock.
So it sounds like you're hitting resistance at that meso level, right?
Yeah, like the level of businesses and organizations.
Yeah. But have you considered the macro level influences too?
Like, what do you mean?
Well, maybe there are like policies
Yeah.
or economic factors
Yeah.
that are actually making it really hard for those businesses to participate.
Oh, that's a good point.
We've
been so focused on like getting the businesses on board.
that we haven't really looked at those bigger forces.
Right. And what about the micro level?
Like what?
Have you talked to the people who live in those neighborhoods
Oh.
to see what they actually need and want?
Yeah, you're right. We haven't really done that.
Because maybe there are some insights there
Mm-hmm.
that could help you like tailor your approach to the businesses.
Wow, you're totally right.
Yeah.
We've made all these assumptions,
Yeah.
but we haven't actually talked to the people we're trying to help.
Right. And this is where Panarchy can be so powerful.
Yeah.
It helps us to see those connections
Uh-huh.
and find those leverage points.
Where we can actually make a difference.
Exactly. So instead of feeling stuck and powerless,
Yeah.
you can use Panarchy to map it out.
Okay.
understand the influences, and find those strategic spots.
Where I can actually do something.
Maybe you can make a difference, yeah.
And it doesn't have to be this huge thing, right?
No, not all.
Even small actions can have those ripple effects. Maybe just talking to a few residents.
Yeah.
And using their feedback when I talk to the businesses.
Exactly. That could be the thing that changes everything.
So, listener, if you're feeling stuck, whether it's a personal project, work, or even a big social issue that you care about, think about how Panarchy can help you.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask those big picture questions.
Ask those questions. What are the different levels? What are the influences? And where are those leverage points?
You don't have to have all the answers right away.
Right.
It's about being curious.
And it's also about collaborating, right?
Absolutely.
Talking to people who have different experiences than you.
Yeah, you'd be surprised what you can learn from other people.
So Panarchy is like a tool to help us move from feeling overwhelmed to feeling like we can actually do something.
Yeah, it's about understanding that we're all part of these systems.
And our actions matter.
Our actions matter.
Even the small ones.
Even the small ones.
So as we wrap up our Panarchy deep dive, we encourage you to keep exploring this framework.
There are so many resources out there.
Yeah, check out that Liberating Structures website we mentioned.
Yeah, that's a great place to start.
And talk to people about this stuff.
Yeah, share what you learned.
The more people who understand systems thinking,
the better
off we'll all be, right?
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone.
It's been fun.
It has been fun.
Yeah.
We hope this has given you some new ideas and inspired you to think about the systems you're part of and how you can make a difference.
Yeah. Go out there and make some ripples.
Make some ripples. That's it for this deep dive. See you next time.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.